But while the Holy Spirit has been referred to as the Cinderella of theology or the forgotten God, this isn't to say that the Holy Spirit has never been considered an equal divine member of the Trinity. And the formulation and orthodox development of the Holy Spirit as equally God with the Father and Son was developed and codified and fully established by the 3rd century as theologians battled various spiritual heresies. And of course, spiritual quote unquote heresies are also prevalent in the world today as well, which in many ways, because of the various spiritual heresies and the seemingly, ostensibly, almost chaotic nature of spiritual churches, of charismatic churches, in many ways that was what contributed to the subsequent centuries and the church's reluctance to talk about the Holy Spirit, because you can't really control it. It's unpredictable. And as we even see in the Bible itself, the church transforms from an informal movement into something more established, something more institutional. And the thing about institutions is they want structure, they want order. And when you have something like the Holy Spirit, it almost is a chaotic challenge to the type of structure and institution that the church was turning into. Heresies challenged the church organization, and so it was necessary to define the Holy Spirit, what it is, what it does, how it acts, in order to combat some of the heresies and the worst excesses of the heresies. For example, there was Montanism. Second century charismatic Montanists who claimed direct spiritual knowledge separate from the church. And of course, the church doesn't want that, right? The church wants to say, we have the knowledge, we have what's true. And so the Montanists were an early example of spiritual heresies. And we have the Cappadocian Fathers, who are very important, including Basil the Great, Gregory of Nazianzen, and Gregory of Nyssa, as well as Athanasius, who developed orthodoxy, the full deity of the Spirit in equality with the Father and the Son. This is what Basil the Great writes against the heretics known as the pneumatomachoi, fighters against the Spirit. I swear that every man who confesses Christ but denies the Father, Christ will profit him nothing. If a man calls upon God but rejects the Son, his faith is empty. If someone rejects the Spirit, his faith in the Father and the Son is made useless. It is impossible to believe in the Father and the Son without the presence of the Spirit. He who rejects the Spirit rejects the Son, and he who rejects the Son rejects the Father. See the equality there. No one can say Jesus is Lord, and Lord is a divine concept, except in the Holy Spirit. And no one has ever seen God, the only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father. He has made him known. Such a person has no part in true worship. It is impossible to worship the Son except in the Holy Spirit. It is impossible to call upon the Father except in the Spirit of adoption. And so we have the early development of pneumatology and the full deity of the Holy Spirit in such documents such as the Apostles' Creed, I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life. So we have these divine concepts who proceeds from the Father and the Son. With the Father and the Son, he is worshipped and glorified. You don't worship a creation. You don't worship something less than God. Otherwise, it's idolization. He has spoken, the Spirit has, through the prophets. So here are some issues related to pneumatology in church history. The controversy surrounding the Filioque doctrine, which is and the Son. And so, what the Western Church decided on its own, without consulting other churches, is we're going to add filioque, which means that the Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. So it creates kind of a hierarchy, right, of Father first, Son second, the Spirit third. And the Western Church did that on its own without consulting the East, because the East, they were all about the Spirit. So we also have this difference between Logos Christology and Spirit Christology. And Logos is the Word, Jesus Christ, whereas the Spirit is focused on the Spirit. And so here we also have a kind of subordination of the Spirit to the Son. Issues related to pneumatology that concerns us today is, what is the role of it in terms of gifts, spiritual gifts and tongues? How does the Spirit enact sanctification in the lives of individual believers? What does the Spirit do relative to salvation? And what does it mean for the Spirit to be in all of creation, not just individual human beings? Particularly in the 21st century, when we're very focused on structural sins, structural racism, structural discrimination, it might be helpful to consider the Spirit as something that's present in all of creation as a means to defeat and overcome structural injustices. Contemporary approaches to the Holy Spirit include feminist pneumatology. The Holy Spirit has and the word associated with Spirit, both in Hebrew, Greek, Latin, has a kind of feminine sense, and so recovering pneumatology in many ways can recover and promote feminism. And echo-pneumatology, because the Holy Spirit pervades all of creation, it's almost seen as a way to affirm creation in order to combat the worst sins done against the environment. And Pentecostalism, which is the fastest growing denomination in the world, as well as the Spirit and liberation theology, how the Spirit can empower individuals, can empower institutions to work against injustices, as well as science. Because modern approaches to science, whether it be chaos theory or relativity or all of that, has a sense of a kind of force field. And so if we can associate a force field, an environment, with the Spirit, then perhaps the Holy Spirit can be a bridge by which we can communicate theology with science. One of the options you have for the critical book review is Elizabeth Johnson's work, She Who Is, which is a reframing of the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, to reflect feminine images, feminine metaphors. Because, as she argues, words and names are absolutely important. And so she understands the Trinity as Spirit Sophia, Mother Sophia, and Jesus Sophia, with the focus on the word Sophia, which is feminine. And the Spirit is God filling the world to arouse life and form kinships, creating, sustaining, guiding all things, metaphors and images that invoke a kind of mothering. So this was a basic introduction to pneumatology, and I very much look forward to reading your theology posts, as well as your engagement with the article on the Holy Spirit and the Asian concept of Qi.